as if you've been with us, you know we're in the middle of this series called Get Out of the Boat. And we're talking about the difference of living in faith versus fear. And how God calls us to take these steps into faith. And every time we step in faith, there is fear. We have to battle fear every single time we step into faith. If there was no fear involved, there really wouldn't be faith, right? If there was no fear involved, you'd just be doing something. But when we step through faith, that means we have to step out of fear. And so we've been looking at different people through the book of Genesis and how they did this in their lives. We looked at Abraham and Isaac, and we're finishing up the story of Jacob today. I want to ask you this question before we get started. Do you have a name that people expect you to live up to? Or let me phrase it a little bit different. Do you have a name that people expect you to live down to? You know, are there things about you, a name maybe that your family has for you, when they think of you, they think of certain behaviors, bad behaviors, maybe stereotypes, maybe your past? Do people define you by things in your past? And do you kind of feel like you're never going to break out of that way that people have defined you? Well, that's where we find Jacob today. Jacob is at that place in life where he realizes, look, I can't continue being this guy. If I want to experience the blessings of God, I've got to be not who people expect me to be, not who I myself expect me to be, but I have to be who God expects me to be. In fact, who God says I actually am. And I don't know if you know that, but God says you are something. We just all get the opportunity to decide if we're going to believe him, if we're going to live by what he says we are, or if we're going to live by maybe the standards, whatever baggage you carry from being raised says you are, or whatever baggage you carry from going from school and friends, or just the evil voice of the enemy inside you that is constantly telling you you're not going to be any different. We pick up Jacob today, and he has left his father-in-law, his uncle, really. He's left his home, his homestead, and he's going back to the promised land, his homeland. And here at his homeland, he's going back to finally step into the blessings that God has promised him from the very beginning. He has spent his whole life being a schemer, a deceiver, choosing to live up to his name. Jacob, the name Jacob means heel grabber. And he's chosen to live up to that name of grabbing onto other people's heel and pulling them down and using it as an opportunity to pull himself up. And from today on, what we see is he starts stepping in to no longer being the heel grabber, but being the one who struggles with God and comes out in blessing. So let's jump in. Chapter 32. We're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 32 through 35 today, spending most of our time in chapter 32 and 33. All right. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of the place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, saying, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants, and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I might find favor in your sight." And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two camps, thinking, if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. And Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I'm not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me and my mother's with their children. But you said, I will surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Okay, let's stop there for a second. So Jacob sees these angels, and that's a way of God kind of promising that he is still with him. And we see this dedication, and he's seeming to start to give to God. But he's still scared of Esau. If you haven't been with us, Esau, 2 weeks ago, we talked about how he deceived Esau out of his blessing. He deceived actually his dad, Isaac, out of Esau's blessing. He took Esau's blessing. And then he also schemed Esau out of his birthright. So he's basically stolen from Esau everything that was kind of rightfully his by that culture. And he had to leave for fear of his own life. His mother basically sent him out rather than face the music. His mother sent him out for fear of his life. So he's been away from Esau for 20 years. And the last thing Esau said, the last thing he remembers Esau saying is, I'm going to kill you. Right? So that's the last thing he heard. Can you imagine getting ready to go to a family reunion to see some uncle or cousin? The last thing they said to you was, I'm going to kill you. Right? I mean, it's a little, you can see the nerve-wrackingness that he's facing, right? And then what does he hear? Hey, yeah, he's coming to meet you, and he's got 400 men with him. Now, Esau, if you remember, Esau's kind of a manly dude. He's a burly guy, a tough guy, outdoor guy. I can imagine 400 guys following him are also kind of, pretty big guys. They're probably not, he probably doesn't think he's coming out with the debate team, right? He's probably saying, hey, he's coming out for battle. He's coming out to wipe me out. So it makes sense that he fears Esau. But what does he do? See, old Jacob, up until this point, Jacob has made every decision out of fear. And in his fear, what would Jacob have done? Hey, run today, live to fight another day, right? I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna go build myself up bigger. Obviously, Jacob's still mad. Esau's still mad. I'm gonna take off. But he doesn't do that. What does he do? He prays. He prays and he says, hey, God, you know that promise you gave me? Probably not going to work out really well if I'm dead, right? So he basically says, Esau's coming to kill me. But notice what he says. He says, I fear him. This is the first place we actually see Jacob own his fear, admit it. We're good at not admitting that we're afraid, aren't we? We're good at denying our fear. We're good at saying, at pretending we've got it all together. We take the fear that we have, and rather than own it and admit it and just say, man, this is a hard situation. I'm scared right now. What do? We come up with devices so often to protect ourselves in our fear. And that's the way Jacob has lived his life up until now. He has just tried to protect himself when he's afraid, rather than going to God for the first time here and saying, God, I'm afraid. I fear him, and rightfully so. I have done nothing to deserve what you've done for me, God. I'm a wretched man. And we talked about there's a place in Isaiah where Jacob is called a worm, and he's probably the first time he's starting to see that in himself. And he says, I came here with nothing. God, you've continued to bless me. I got to believe that you still have a plan in this. I think that's such an important step for us to understand. If we're going to experience the blessings that God has for us, we have to own that we're afraid. We have to own that we're afraid. And here's the deal, you guys. Fear is a growing thing in our culture. And I think the only way we get out of it is if we own that we have it, and then we keep moving. See, a lot of times we either deny it, or we just say, yeah, that's who I am, and I'm afraid, and we don't push ourselves. We say, because of my fear, I'm just going to stay here. And we've become a culture that says, yeah, you should. Don't push yourself through your anxiety. That's bad for you. Just do this, take this, isolate yourself, do those kinds of things. But that's not what God calls us to do when we have fear. We're called to own it and then step through it into faith. And that's what we see Jacob doing here. He's stepping through his fear and into faith. Verse 13 says, so he stayed there the night. And from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking cows and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. Then he handed over to his servants every drove by itself and said to his servants, pass on ahead of me and put the space between drove and drove. So he's saying he's got a couple servants with the cattle, and he says, you guys go first. And he's got a couple servants with the goats. You guys go next. And he instructed the first, when Esau, my brother, meets you and asks, to whom do you belong? Where are you going? And whose are these ahead of you? Then you shall say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau. And moreover, he is behind us. He likewise instructed the second and the third and all who followed the droves. You shall say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me. And afterwards, I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed the night in the camp. So there's a few things here I want us to look at. First of all, remember, we talked about this a few weeks back. These are blessed and wealthy men. These families are blessed and wealthy. To do the math, that's 540 animals he's sending as a gift. Right? I know some of you are farmers. Anyone here own over 540 animals? Anyone? No? Okay. Well, right. See, I mean, that's a lot of animals, right? They own a lot of animals, and livestock was a huge aspect of commerce back then. So he's sending a massive gift. Now we got to guess that he's keeping some. We don't know how much. So I think he's really giving Esau. I think he's sending him with pretty much most of it. I think he's at this place where he's repentant and he realizes Esau owes him nothing. So he's just keeping enough probably to say, hey, I can kind of keep my life going and feed my servants and my family with this and trusting God to bless him. But he's sending 540 animals of this gift. And he sends his servants in separate groups, and he's hoping this gift will appease Esau. Now, you could say, well, see, he's still scheming. He's not trusting God. Okay, have you ever heard hope is not a plan? Never heard that? Okay. So, yes, he could just say, hey, God, I just trust you. I'm just going to show up and go, hey, Esau, hope everything's good. I got all my stuff here. You got your stuff. Or let's just shake hands and be good. He could do that. That's just not wise. God still causes us to use wisdom, right? And he realized he's remorseful. I messed up. I took a lot from Esau. I actually do owe him something. And so he's going to him with a wise gift. This is a wise plan on his part. I don't see this as him scheming. I think it's him realizing he doesn't deserve to be treated with mercy. Right? So he's making an effort to make an amends. Well, then we have one of the most, probably, in my mind, one of the most interesting passages in Scripture. So Jacob has sent this whole gift ahead of him. And he's pretty much left with his family. He's probably got a couple servants there attending them as well. But verse 22 says this. The same night he arose and he took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and he crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. think it's interesting. Stop right there. He's left alone. This is the first time we see that Jacob is alone since, remember, the last time he had a dream of God's angels ascending to and from heaven, and he dedicated that place to God. But now he's alone, and we're going to see he doesn't have a dream. He has an actual interaction with God. We call this a Christophany. If you were here a few weeks back, we talked about this. The places in the Old Testament where Jesus comes in a physical form and interacts with people. So Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men, and you have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask me my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose up upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of the hip, which, by the way, he limped from that day on. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is in the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. All right, let's just stop there for a second. So this picture, this instance that happens, paints a perfect picture that summarizes the life of Jacob. This one night summarizes Jacob's entire life. In this one night, he has a physical wrestling with God for what? A blessing. He wrestles with God for a blessing. Did he need to wrestle with God? No. God intended the blessing for him from the very beginning. But Jacob spent his whole life running from this blessing. Jacob spent his whole life trying to figure out his own plan rather than receive God's blessing. Jacob spent his whole life choosing to live up to his name, heel grabber. If you think back on your life, are there people that have a name for you? You know, not your actual name. But are there things that people think about you that you know are negative? That maybe you know your mom thinks a certain way about you. She compares you to your other sisters. Or your dad thinks a certain way about you, comparing you to your other brothers. Or all the kids in school thought about you or think about you today. Or you think they thought about you. You know, growing up, I I was raised in a pretty strong family, except my parents. Both my dad and mom are drug addicts. And so when I was 1 year old, I was taken out of their home and then eventually ended up living with my grandparents on my dad's side. But my dad and my mom always had this reputation in our family. Just, you know, and as a kid, you hear it, right? You hear the things people say. They don't think you do, but you're paying attention. And, you know, and people would say things about my dad. All of them true, every single one of them. As knowing him as an adult, I'm like, yeah, those are all true. But it started to get in me that I was probably going to be the same. That's who I was. And so, you know, and I grew up with these cousins. I have one cousin that is seriously like super certified genius, you know, like we would get together when I remember he was 10 years old and he would lock himself in a room and read the encyclopedia. If you're under 40, that was these books. All of Wikipedia was on in your house. Anyway, but he would do that. And so I had a couple of cousins that were super smart, did really well in school. And then I had this one cousin who was super he was a star on dirt bikes, motocross. I mean, he did amazing jumps and like he just always stood out, and I always just felt like I didn't have a thing. And so in my head, my thing became that I was just going to be that kid, the one that was going to grow up like my dad. And, and I started down the path, started doing drugs and started hated school and did horrible in school, graduated school with a 1.89 GPA. Just some of you are like, you can do that low? That's possible, yeah. So that was the life. I thought that's the name I was supposed to live up to. And I was totally headed down that path. But then God got a hold of me. And I thank God that God gave me a different vision for my life. God got a hold of me and I started serving in a youth ministry. I started serving. I sometimes question their judgment in letting me be around junior hires when I was 20. But they let me serve with these youth. And I started to find kids that felt like I did. And I started to realize I could help them see that that's not who they had to be. And they could be different than the way they felt. And God saw them as different. And God didn't see them the way their family saw them. And I was truly able to make a difference in people's lives. And I caught that vision. And here I am today. But the point is, had I not decided to believe what God said about me, versus what the inner voices said about me and what my family might have been saying about me. I have no idea, but I thought they were. And at least the way I kind of felt that they saw me, the way my teachers saw me, right? If I'd chosen those voices, I would be a different person right now. I definitely wouldn't be here. And I say that to say we all go through this time where we have to decide. Are we going to believe who God says we are? Are we going to step into the blessing that God has for us? Or are we going to just keep wrestling him and fighting him and pushing against him? Because you get to decide. No one else gets to decide that for you. Only you decide if you're going to listen to God or listen to all the other voices. Jacob literally had to go through a physical wrestling. Frederick von Bachner says this. He calls this moment in Jacob's life the magnificent defeat of the human soul at the hands of God. The magnificent defeat of the human soul at the hands of God. What is he talking about? The human soul, the darkness, the sinful heart. At the hand of God, he actually defeated that in Jacob so he could rise up out of it. See, God doesn't want us to live in our trials. He doesn't want us to leave us there in them, in our fears and our battles. He wants to use our conflicts and these things that we struggle with in order to grant us gifts and blessings in our life. Your greatest conflict in your life, can be your greatest blessing if you will submit it to him and trust him for what he says about you. But you have to daily make that decision. See, through what it feels like the darkest defeats, you can find the truest victories if you're willing to submit those defeats to him. If you're willing to do the work of it. He said, work. Well, what work? I thought we weren't supposed to work for our salvation. We don't have to work for our salvation. But we do have to work for the blessings of God. If we want to experience them, it takes a little work. It takes the work of wrestling ourselves into submission before him. See, only after a physical wrestling with God and coming face to face with him does Jacob get to a place of being able to live in the blessings that God has for him. And for how many of you is that your life story? For how many of us do we have to wrestle? See, there are some of those kids, some of those people, they kind of were just born complacent in some ways. And they just have complacent mindset. Some of that is some of you out here. And praise God for that. That's an awesome thing to have. Because, I tell you, I wish I didn't have to go through all the things I've gone through. I have a granddaughter, Peyton, 5 years old. You see her around here a lot. That kid is one of the most stubborn kids I've ever met. And she constantly gets herself in trouble for things that all she would have to do is just admit she's wrong. Or just stop. Just not argue anymore. Just stop arguing. You're fine. And as a grandparent, I want to save her. I want to salve, I'm always like, hey, she's okay. But I watch her dad just battle with her, right? And he kind of has to teach her, like, no, you got to learn this. And it's so hard to watch her learn it, but I feel like that's so many of us. We just have to, we decide we're going to learn things the hard way. Well, Jacob gets the name Israel, and it means to struggle with God and prevail. And that's truly how that name is translated. And it's interesting. I love that that's the name. I love this name is to struggle with God and prevail. Why? Because that name is the name that God's people are called throughout history. And I love that God's people are called one who struggles with God. They're not called one who's always submissive to God. They're not called one who just always gets it right with God. They're not called one who just daily experiences God's blessings. No, Israel, God's people, that's us now too, we're ones who struggle with God. It's a struggle. And I think some people think that some people just get it right in their faith and they just get, no. It's a struggle we all battle through in some ways. Well, let's move on. Jacob comes out of this night, and he has prevailed. And like I said, he now from here on out, we'll see that later on. If you read through all these passages, you'll see he walks with this limp his whole life as a reminder. Right? Because even the things I've overcome in my life, I have these reminders, these things I have to deal with still because of the mistakes I've made in my past, right? But the next morning, chapter 33, it says, and Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two female servants. And he put the servants with their children in the very front. And then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. But listen what he does, so different than anything Jacob's ever done in his life. Verse 3, he himself went on before them, bowing down to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. You see that? First time in his life, Jacob puts himself in harm's way. First time in his life, Jacob says, I'll be the one. I'm going to own up to this. He doesn't hide behind them. Now that he is following God, he goes from coward to courageous. And he trusts what's going to happen. He doesn't know what's going to happen. I mean, he has spent his life running from his problems instead of facing them. And he spent his life living in fear and scheming. And everything in his life is a product of this fear that he's constantly made choices by. And now he's facing it. He's facing it. See, it's interesting with fear. Fear came into the world as a result of sin. Think about that. There was no fear until sin. Genesis chapter 3 is the first time we see fear. Why? They ate the fruit, they heard God coming, and they hid because they were afraid. Up until that time, there was no reason to fear God. They wanted to be in relationship with God. And ever since then, we've been making decisions out of fear. And the decisions we make out of fear never lead to love. They never lead to victory. They never lead to success. They might lead to protection for a short time. but they never lead to love. So Jacob goes to the front. Verse 4. Right away, he's probably starting to regret this, right? He's at the front, and what does he see? But Esau ran to meet him. Okay, now we get to read right after that, and embraced him. Okay, we get to read that. But he didn't, right? He sees Esau in the distance running towards him. I don't know about you, but I'm probably not thinking, hey, my brother just wants to give me a big hug. Right? I very rarely, I have two brothers. I've never once have thought, oh, they're running to give me a hug. No, not once in my life. So, right? I mean, this whole time we get to read, he embraced him. This is another moment for Jacob to act in fear, but he doesn't. Right? Because what could have been the wise thing if you were living in fear? What would have the wise thing to been to do? To hold a dagger right behind your back and wait for him to get close, right? Pull right as he gets close, right? That would have been a fearful move. But he lets Esau runs and he embraces him and he falls on his neck and he kisses him and they wept. See, if Jacob would have acted out of fear, he would not have had the opportunity for redemption that he has here. Verse 5. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, who are these with you? Jacob said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, what do you mean by all this company that I met? Jacob answered, to find favor in the sight of my Lord. But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. See, Esau doesn't need this. Esau's doing fine. But listen to what Jacob says. But Jacob said, no, please. If I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. Thus he urged him, and he took it. So you can notice that. Jacob doesn't just go, oh, okay, cool, I'll just keep it. Right? He says, no, I need to do this. This is for me as much as it's for you. I can't live with myself if I don't do something. He's truly remorseful. And where does he give the credit to? Does he say, hey, no, you need to take this, man. I have been so fortunate and I have gotten so much. I just feel like, I need to do something. No, he says, God has given me all of this and I trust that God's going to continue to bless me. This is him complete. Jacob is changing right before our eyes. Verse 12. Then Esau said, let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children until I come to my Lord in Seir. So Esau said, let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. But he said, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir, but Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the name of the place is called Succoth. So just so you know, these places are just a couple miles apart. So this isn't him saying, oh, actually, I went over here. No, it's just he journeyed there, kind of that idea. We're two wealthy people. We're going to not try to share the same resources. Verse 18, Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is the land of Canaan, on his way from Padam Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money this piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Eloh Israel. So once again, he's just a few miles from Esau here, but notice what he does again. He erects an altar. And that altar is literally translated the God of Israel. He's dedicating himself and this place, this new life, to following the God of Israel. Chapter 34, we read a story I'm not going to get into. You're welcome to read it. It's an interesting story where you see his sons have kind of picked up on his scheming ways, and they end up causing some problems there. But let me just read chapter 30, parts of chapter 35 here before we close. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his household and all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you and purify yourselves and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to the God who answers me in the day of my distress and who has been with me wherever I have gone." Notice that? Notice that total credit he's giving to God. So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob hid them underneath the terebinth tree that was near Shechem. God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Paddan and blessed him. And God said to him, "Your name is Jacob. No longer shall your name be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name." So he called his name Israel. And God said to him, "I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come from your own body. The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac I will give to you. I will give you the land of your offspring after you." Then God went up from him in the place where he had spoken to him, and Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken to him, a pillar of stone. He poured out a drink offering on it, and he poured oil on it. So Jacob called the name of the place where God had spoken with him Bethel. If you've been with us for these whole last 3 weeks, you've seen a man live his life like many men do, like many people do, where we spend so much of it trying to outsmart God, trying to deny God, trying to feel like we don't need God, trying to keep from submitting to God so that we can try to make things happen the way we want them to happen, and facing the consequences of all the chaos he creates in his life. We see him go from that to becoming a man who experiences the blessings of God. Still having baggage because of his decisions and the things he's had to do, the things he's done, and he's going to have to pay for that. But we see the difference. I used to read through the story of Jacob and kind of wonder, I was like, what's the point of this guy? But the more I've read the story of Jacob, the more I really identify with Jacob. The more I think, man, and we're going to get into Joseph next week, and I love Joseph. Joseph's an awesome story, but I'm also like, man, to be a guy like that, how do you do that? I can't get any of that right the way he does. I'm much more like Jacob. I'm the hard knocks. And I think one of the biggest struggles so many of us live with in life, doesn't matter your age, is daily deciding what name are we going to live up to? Are you going to live up to the name your family has for you? Are you going to live up to the name your peers see you as? Are you going to live up to your sin nature, the name that the enemy tells you are? Are you going to keep living up to your past mistakes? Is that who you're going to be? Is that where you're going with your life? Or are you going to choose to live up to the name God gives you? Are you going to choose to see yourself how God sees you? We're going to head into a song of decision. And as we do, I just want to encourage you to think about this time and ask yourself during this song, God, who do you say I am? God, I don't want to believe the enemy anymore. God, I want to believe that you say I'm a child of the King. You say that I'm redeemable. You say I am loved. You say I am worthy. I want to believe those things, God. We're going to have prayer counselors on the sides. If you want to go up and pray with one of the prayer counselors, they would love to just pray with you, partner with you in prayer. But there's communion. If you want to use this as a time to just thank Jesus for the price he paid because you are worthy. If you want to just stay and share and meditate, you can do that. But join us as we close with this song of decision. Let's pray and we'll sing. Father God, thank you so much that you say we are worthy, even though we know we're not. You say we are redeemable, but we know it's only because of you. God, you say that we are created with purpose, even though the world tells us so often that it's all meaningless. God, I just pray if there's anyone here today that is battling what name they're going to live up to. God, I pray that they know your mercy, they know your grace, and they know that you are the God of redemption, the God that makes all things new. In Jesus' name, amen.